Welcome to the Fitness Stuff for Normal People podcast. I'm Tony, as always, here with my co-host Marianna. Now, it's no secret, the fitness industry sucks. Whether it's the corrupt multi-billion-dollar supplement and weight loss industry or the endless supply of influencers promoting absolutely anything to drive page views or put a dollar in their pockets. The bottom line is we're not just trying to make another fitness podcast. There's 100 of those, but actually change the fitness industry for the better. And we want to do that by providing you with the knowledge and tools to actually give you the confidence to apply the best possible training, nutrition, supplementation, and habits into your own life. Where today we finally dedicate an entire episode to the monster that is artificial sweeteners. Just kidding. We're going to find out it's not really a monster. But here's the thing. There seems to always be two camps when it comes to this conversation. One that is so far anti-artificial sweeteners, claiming they cause cancer, diabetes, heart attack, stroke, weight gain, even CNN publishing an article titled Zero-Calorie Sweeteners Linked to Heart Attack, Stroke, New Study Finds. And the other group, which is on the complete other side, claiming that they don't have any influence over any health outcomes at all. And shocker is, whenever two groups exist in health or fitness, the answer lies somewhere in the middle. And that's what we're trying to find out today, where we're talking about the different artificial sweeteners, because you can't lump them all together, the difference between natural and artificial zero-calorie sweeteners like stevia and monk fruit versus aspartame and saccharin. And then we look at the individual sweeteners and their impact on specific health outcomes like cancer, diabetes, weight gain, and more, and then determine the doses of each that seem to be completely safe and when they might start to impact you, because specificity matters. And before we jump in, I want to give a special thank you to everyone who's taken the 10 seconds that you could even spend right now giving us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening. We don't work with a big media company, and those reviews help push it out to so many more people. So if you're listening, a little pat on the back, a little hug from Tony and Marianna if you've left us a 5-star review. And you can always follow us on Spotify now so you don't miss another episode every single Monday when they drop.
We're almost at 12,000, so followers on Spotify, which is huge. So
that's pretty cool.
That. And if you really like the research aspect that we bring into each episode, or if you're just trying to find a place where you can interact with Tony and I more, you can join us in our premium membership in the weekly Fitness Stuff Research Review. We dive deeper into specific studies addressing individual nuances, showing you how to apply each aspect into your own specific lifestyle. And we also give you the chance to ask us any questions you may have. And we dive into those once a month with our Ask Me Anything episodes. And you can even suggest podcast episodes for us to discuss in detail. It's a great way for us to interact with you guys and feel like we're building more of a community, because you guys support us so much, and so we want to be able to provide a place where it could be a bit more personal. The first month is just $5 if you want to go check it out. Can't wait to see you over there. The link will be in our show notes. And before we get started, a few notes from our sponsor. We love Legion, and there is a reason why Tony and I feel the way we do about Legion. We don't just say that about any company, because we talk about how broken the supplement industry is all the time. That's why we really try to recommend companies' products that are evidence-based and put a lot of their time into being evidence-based, and Legion does exactly that. They fund scientific research studies in nutrition, exercise, supplementation to help advance our collective understanding on how to live fitter, healthier lives. Every article, podcast, and video they produce is vetted by a team of medical doctors, PhDs, and other professionals, and they work with an entire scientific review board. And their products are also delicious. I personally have been obsessing with their protein powder ever since Tony introduced it to me. I think I don't know how often it is that I go a day without it. I personally struggle to hit my protein without it, and it tastes really good. High quality whey protein isolate, easy to digest, absorb, and doesn't taste terrible, which I find a lot do. They have a bunch of other great supplements, but that's the one I go back to time and time again. You can get 20% off your first order, double points on every order after that, by following the link in our show notes or typing in FSPod at checkout.
I have a huge protein goal. I've got like 200 grams a day, and I need 1 to 2 of those shakes, or there's zero chance for me to get in. Also, it's the first shake for me that's lactose free that actually doesn't screw up my gut when I take them. So that's why I've loved them for so long. Is that lactose free?
I feel like a lot of people don't know that. It's whey
Yeah.
protein isolate is lactose free. It is.
Yeah, there's the whey isolate and whey concentrate, which we're actually going to talk about with our next sponsor, the Strong Inside. But isolate and concentrate, a lot of people can handle concentrate. But if you're someone whose stomach can't handle dairy very well, whey protein isolate isolates the lactose out of the protein. So you're just getting the protein. So it's a lot easier on most people, which is pretty cool. Yo, what's up? We actually had to refilm this intro section of the ad because we have a monster giveaway announcement to finish off May. You guys have heard us talking about our partnership with the Strong Inside for the past few weeks now, with the goal of just sharing the impact complete proteins from milk can have on your health, no matter what stage of life you're in or how old you are. Now, just like we aim to do with this podcast, the Strong Inside aims to help provide you with accurate information to make informed choices about which proteins from milk are right for you and your health.
And this month, I'm so excited about this. The Strong Inside is hosting an insane giveaway. So one of you will receive, this is a long list, so stick around, a Peloton Tread Ultimate Package with all of its accessories, a 2-month supply of protein bars, a 2-month supply of protein powder, a Blend Jet, branded sweat towels, and protein recipe cards. You definitely don't want to miss out on this. It's for the entire month of May, and you can enter by heading on over to the link down in our show notes and enter the code FITSTUFF for 5 additional entries to increase your chances of winning.
A Peloton freaking treadmill.
I know.
The gold standard treadmill.
I want one. I don't know where I would put it.
I've already entered 5 times. But we wish you the best of luck. Back to the episode. Bum, bum, bum.
Boop, boop.
Today, this is okay. Funny story, because we were talking about this when we were deciding what episodes we were going to do, because we've done 2 research reviews dedicated specifically to studies done on artificial sweeteners. And we talk about them all the time. And we're like, we're 67, 68 episodes in now, and we just realized like a week or 2 ago that we don't have an episode dedicated to artificial sweet. We're like, wait a second, we have to go check the archives. There's no freaking way we don't have an episode yet. And that's what got us here, which I'm pretty pumped for.
I'm so excited about this one. We get questions about it all the time, and I think it's one of those topics that it's not going to fizzle out. I feel like it's just going to be around, and people are going to be curious about it. There's going to be claims. There's going to be bad studies. There's going to be some good studies, and it's about time we talked about it. Yeah,
and to even set it straight, Marianna and I, we're not pro artificial sweeteners. We're not like this is the best thing to ever exist. What we're trying to do, and especially what you'll probably learn more about today, we're more anti people making ridiculous claims and misinterpreting research. That's all we really care about, is how to interpret what the data actually says, so we can actually make more informed decisions about every aspect of our health. The same thing we've done in every single episode to this point. That's all we're trying to do. So we're not pro or against. We're not in either of those teams, which I think is kind of important to state as well. Because I feel like most people like to lump people into one of those 2 groups that we talked about before, don't you?
And when it comes to diet, also just thinking about where these artificial sweeteners typically are found. They're not found in whole foods like your fruits, your vegetables, your whole grains, your proteins, which Tony and I have advocated for that being the gold standard over and over again. And looking at it, we're not looking at this as make artificial sweeteners the whole of your diet or center your diet around artificial sweeteners, because that's not promoting eating whole foods. That is typically what you should try to lean towards. So I know people will probably take this however they want to take it, but we like to give those disclaimers first because people
will do. Let them do what they want. Let them do what they want. Let them do what they want. Because, and here's the biggest piece that we bring up in a lot of different, not debates, but I guess arguments, whatever you want to call them, in fitness and health. A lot of them when we talk about like even seed oils, but especially when it comes to artificial sweeteners, is most of the time people making these arguments. And I think even more so on people making the arguments against artificial sweeteners, they have a thought error in their argument. And that's where they just lump them all together. And we're going to talk about, there's over a dozen different sweeteners, nutritive and non-nutritive, artificial and natural. And they all do different and very specific things, and they interact with your body in different ways. So if someone just says artificial sweeteners are bad, it's like, well, which one? And in what specific health measure is it bad? And that's the biggest argument that I see. So lumping them all together, it's really just showing how lazy and unqualified that person is to talk about what they're talking about. So I want to first break down the biggest differences, which I think most people don't even take the time to realize, right? So there's nutritive and non-nutritive sweeteners. So today we're talking about non-nutritive sweeteners, which means they don't contain calories or very, very little calories. So nutritive sweeteners would be like fructose, corn syrup, sugar alcohols, right? They contain calories. The non-nutritive or calorie-free versions like aspartame, saccharin, ACE-K, stevia, monk fruit, erythritol, all these kinds, those are what we're specifically talking about today. But I think a more important note that most people do not separate is there's a difference between artificial and natural non-calorie sweeteners, right? So just something that's non-caloric that sweetens food can be natural or it can be artificial. And that's where I don't think people really separate it. So artificial, meaning not derived from a natural resource. So like aspartame, saccharin, sucralose, ACE-K, those names that you might have heard thrown around. But then the natural non-nutritive sweeteners, these are derived from a natural source, like stevia from the leaves of the stevia plant, monk fruit extract from a small fruit in southern China, and Vantame, erythritol, the one that we're going to talk about that was all over the news in that CNN study, right? Erythritol is a natural non-calorie sweetener. It occurs naturally in many fruits and vegetables that our body even produces on its own. So when people were having this argument, that's what cracked me up the most about erythritol, is they kept lumping it as an artificial sweetener. And that's not what it is at all. The people arguing for it don't even know what it is.
But then you'll also, I find you get the camp too that will overplay how it's so much more beneficial to have a natural sweetener. Like you will get those camps of stevia is okay, but sucralose is killing you. And it's like, well, wait, no, that's not the case. So I see it both ways because just because something says that it's from a natural source
doesn't mean it's better.
Mean that it's better for your health. I think people kind of understand that now. Seeing, is there still like the natural label on like 100% natural? That's different from this. So having a natural label is very different from being derived from. But there's so many ways people will choose to nitpick something when it kind of deviates from the point. But I'm glad that we separated because I do know that a lot of people don't see the differentiation.
Well, and I know today, because, and this is the first big piece, is we want to talk about the approval process. Like, how are these legal in the first place? Before jumping into, and how we wanted to structure this episode is by actually dissecting each specific health outcome and seeing where there might be an impact instead of just kind of going and throwing it all over a wall. But it's important to know all of these sweeteners have gone through the approval process of the FDA. And Marianna is going to jump into this even deeper, but the FDA approval process, it's not a joke. But listen, I'm down to clown. I love a good conspiracy theory. Like birds aren't real. And I will die by that one. CIA, they're spying on us. That's what it is. But the FDA approval process is not a joke. Even from their website, the statement to market a new food or additive, a manufacturer or other sponsor must first petition FDA for its approval. And these petitions must provide evidence that the substance is safe for the ways in which it will be used. They consider the composition and properties of the substance, the amount that would typically be consumed by a human, the immediate and long-term health effects that there is evidence behind, and various other safety factors. I mean, this is what you were even breaking down to me before, how lucrative of a process this can be.
Yeah, people think that the FDA takes a product and determines it. No, they don't do the research. The FDA isn't doing the research or providing the evidence. They are reviewing the evidence and the work that a lot of independent, keyword independent, review boards and committees. It's not just three old white men on a board that have never taken a science class in their life and have no idea what they're looking at and are just like, yep, this is cool. It's actually really inconsiderate to think that that's the case. And it just goes to show that people have no idea how the FDA approval process works when it comes. And we are talking about food here and food additives. We're not talking about the FDA as a whole. The FDA is very flawed in a lot of ways. Our government is very flawed. And there's always the argument that, the FDA doesn't care about our health. And then you get into a lot of these conspiracy theories about how they're trying to poison us and kill us with these artificial ingredients. And I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, the FDA has our health in their best interests all of the time. I mean, look at our healthcare system. That's enough of an example. But that's not the conversation here. And if you just dive a little bit deeper into who is making these calls when it comes to these regulations for these additives and sweeteners, you would see how tightly regulated it is. And I also don't want to hear the argument that, in Europe, these artificial sweeteners are banned, or these ingredients. There are many additives that are approved for use in Europe that are not approved for use in the US. So it's just simply not an argument. And looking from a worldwide scope, all 8 of these artificial sweeteners, the main ones that Tony had mentioned in the beginning, the leading global health authorities, such as the European Food Safety Authority, the FAO and World Health Organization Joint Expert Committee on Food Additives, the FDA, Food Standards Australia, New Zealand, and Health Canada. I'm encompassing a lot of different countries here.
Yeah.
They didn't just pull this out of nowhere. So the joint FAO and World Health Organization Expert Committee on Food Additives is an international scientific expert committee, an independent committee. They're not working for the FDA. They aren't a panel of FDA men just sitting there making rules. It is a group of researchers, scientists that have dedicated their lives to studying food additives. Yes, that is a field. And they help to review the research and help to determine the safety of these ingredients and food additives we are putting in our food. And it works now also to evaluate contaminants, naturally occurring toxins, residues, so many different things. And we have these regulations and limits now for what is safe to add to foods because of these committees and these researchers. It's not just, let's add these because even though they cause cancer. We're talking about the world, right? Twice a year, these committees and people from all over the world get together and review this. And the USDA and the FDA are going to have different regulations in what they choose to do with this research, and how they inform their regulations are going to be slightly different from in Europe because we're different countries and how we govern and how we work is a little bit different. But they are still based off of the same safety guidelines and research. It's not just coming out of thin air.
And I like breaking down the numbers in real world examples. For aspartame, for example, these organizations had set the recommended daily limit to 40 to 50 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day. I don't think people realize what that actually comes in is that's 25 cans of Diet Coke every day is the still safe limit for people to consume. 25 cans of Diet Coke. Are we telling you to do that? Absolutely not. But this is just based on what they provided. Same thing when it comes to sucralose or stevia. You'd have to consume over 40 packets of stevia per day. ACE-K, you'd have to consume over 32 cans of Diet Coke every single day.
For sucralose, for example, the ADI represents an amount 100 times less than the quantity of sucralose found to be safe in research studies. So even the recommendation and what is legally allowed to be added to food is 100 times less than the quantity that has been found to be safe. So that's even an extra step of being cautious. And that is informed by so much research and so much toxicology reports and looking at data over years and going and doing samples every single year. It is absolutely insane to me, but that people think that these numbers are just dropped out of thin air and there's no logic to it. I guess sometimes I try to make sense of it, but.
Well, I think it does make sense when you hear these things could be potentially harmful. This was a conversation we had when we talked about organic versus inorganic food and how like the pesticides that were allowed to be on produce. And it's like people don't realize, they hear the word pesticide and they're like, pesticide bad. But we have to remember, it's like the poison is in the dose for anything. There's a toxic amount of any vitamin or mineral that you consume. Zinc, if you take over 50 milligrams of zinc every day, a very important mineral, it becomes toxic in your body and you will see very negative health outcomes when it comes to anything, with even water in humans. And the same thing comes with artificial sweeteners, is there is a toxic level. There's a level that you don't want to ingest, but we'll talk and kind of see realistically, like, where is that? And I think a good example is starting off with cancer claims, because I think we're going to spend the most time probably on gut health, because that's especially been a hotter topic lately. But the probably number one thing that I heard growing up was artificial sweeteners cause cancer. And more specifically, people would claim aspartame because it was in Diet Coke. And like we talk about a lot on the show, a lot of these come from the telephone game, where there's one piece of data long time ago and it gets translated 100 different times into something completely different, and people live by that. The same kind of thing comes to this cancer argument. This myth really came from a study in the 1970s. And what it was is essentially it showed that mice that consumed a very large amount of saccharin and cyclimate, which is an artificial that is now banned in the USA. That's an important distinction. No one can have that anymore. But these mice, after being fed this for 2 years, did have an increased risk of bladder cancer. So people see that and they say, oh, well, saccharin and artificial sweeteners would increase bladder cancer in mice. That's big red flag should go off. And again, I want to break it down in numbers to see how realistic this was. Now, it was a large amount of saccharin and artificial sweeteners. And the study actually dosed it at 2,600 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. And mice, it's not very heavy, right? They don't even weigh a single pound. And just for a comparison, that's the equivalent of them injecting about 18 to 24 packets of Sweeten Low into those mice for 2 years. So picture a small little mouse and then inject it with 18 to 24 Sweeten Low packets every single day for 2 years in an equivalent calculation for humans. Myself, for example, I would need to take in 7,200 packets of Sweeten Low every single day for 2 straight years to say, okay, let's look if there's any health outcomes. Does that seem realistic at all?
No.
No. 7,002. I don't think I would die. I mean, I don't think that would fit in my stomach. But that's kind of the point that this comes from is, yes, they did observe a small increase in bladder cancer in these mice, but at superhuman, super physiological levels and doses of these products, where again, do the same thing with zinc. Do the same thing with anything else. If you inject someone with that much, something's going to go wrong.
The same thing could happen if you injected someone with too much vitamin C. There's vitamin and mineral toxicity, like zinc. It was an example, but that is something that people don't think about is these studies are primarily done when they are megadosing these rats or mice with artificial sweeteners in order to help determine that safety limit that is so far off that we wouldn't even see in our diet. But it's important to have that research. And that is what this research is informing. This animal research is very, very important. We're not discounting it. It helps us understand what is safe to be added to foods. And God forbid there is ever a time where we're like, wow, we come out with a new artificial sweetener. And we find that in mice, they have a packet of it a day and they start to develop tumors. Guess what? That artificial sweetener is never going on the market. So that is why they're done, and I don't think people really
exactly right. That's not the point. The point of the study is not to show that it causes cancer. The point of the study is so we are confident that we know the ceiling to where, hey, this might be dangerous once we get close to 7,000 packets of Sweeten Low every single day. And here's the big thing that we talk about a lot before is the difference between this kind of data and translational data. When you start making claims, does it translate to humans? And good for us. There's been plenty of research on humans and cancer and artificial sweetener intake. And since then, every single human study has shown no increase of cancer risk at all. And this is actually a huge cohort study done through the researchers at the University of Washington, where they took a look at over 64,000 adults over 20 years that just ended in 2018. And they usually categorize groups in like low to moderate to high intake for artificial sweeteners to say, okay, at what dose do you start to see these different health outcomes? And the group with the highest artificial sweetener intake had 0 increased risk in any type of cancer compared to any group or the control group who had zero artificial sweeteners reported. And the even funnier part is the mid to lower groups, those two groups, saw a 30 to 62% lower risk of cancer mortality compared to the group who did not use artificial sweeteners. And people are like, well, wait a sec. Not only is it not, quote unquote, causing cancer, but people who have low to moderate doses of artificial sweeteners are actually seeing less cancer mortality than groups who don't have any artificial sweeteners. And shocker, can we guess why that is? Can we guess? What?
Maybe it has to do with other things that actually can have an impact on your health, not just artificial sweetener.
Your lifestyle? Is that what you're saying? Like your lifestyle? Your activity? Exactly. The people who use these light to moderate actually were a little bit more health conscious. They reported less smoking, less drinking, more active lifestyles compared to groups who just had the non-artificial sweetener use. So this argument is kind of funny when it comes to cancer, is that's where it came from. And there's, again, at Mega, I feel like Mega doesn't even do how much justice this is.
No, and I think something important to think about for a second is you don't see people after this study comes out that shows, hey, people who actually were having more artificial sweeteners in their diet had a decreased risk of these diseases and of cancer. Nobody's going out and saying, oh, artificial sweeteners reduce your risk for cancer and heart disease. No one's saying that. Or no one's saying artificial sweeteners make people less sick. Nobody is saying that. But
That's
that is
hilarious.
the
No one
same
does.
exact thing when they go out and say, oh, if the opposite were true, they would say that these artificial sweeteners, and they do say that these artificial sweeteners cause cancer.
That is spot on.
It's the same exact thing. And that's why interpretation of data is so important. And it's easy to glaze past, but Tony and I, we try to be so careful. We're not perfect. I'm sure we've made mistakes plenty of times, but that is why we choose our words very carefully, like lowering a risk, no causation, or may reduce the risk, or there was an association, right? That is, those words shouldn't be glazed over, because a lot of the times if that was switched with this causes XYZ, then you would have a big problem. And we really try not to do that. But
especially what cracks me up is even when it comes down to this, they don't even differentiate the difference between relative and absolute increases, percent increases when they come to all these risks. So people don't realize, for those listening, the difference between like relative and absolute is when someone says X increases your risk of cancer by 13%. Based on that statement, it's an absolute increase, meaning if your risk was 5%, it's now 18%. Versus if it's a relative increase of 13%, your risk went from 5 to about 5.6%. There's a little bit of a difference there. But again, it's in word choice. I think even more in the case when it came to the CNN paper, the article they posted that was titled
Zero-calorie sweetener linked to heart attack and stroke, study finds.
That'll grab you. That'll grab you.
But then that was replicated in so many other news outlets and articles. The same title, the same narrative. That's what these news outlets do. They all say the same exact thing. It's actually quite frightening. And you will see people on the internet saying this study found, and it will be a CNN article. And no one says anything. And so
or a BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed's my favorite culprit.
What? You might as well just read a Yelp review and say, yep, this is evidence-based. Look at this Yelp review.
This is my research.
It's the same exact, except honestly, I would trust a Yelp review more, because Yelp sometimes can really have your back.
They're not biased. They're not trying to, they're actually not biased. Like they're not trying to grab your attention like news articles. Okay. Break down the erythritol study for those not wondering, because I think everyone at one point saw this pop up on social media. New study, artificial sweeteners cause heart disease, stroke. Mm-hmm. So can you just break down the highlights? Because I don't think people took the time to read through the study, which they shouldn't have to, because this is should be a trusted news source.
Yeah. If you are coming here and you might also follow Dr. Ids. He did a great review. So maybe you kind of already know about this, and this will be kind of a refresher, but it talks about erythritol. So it's important to understand what that is. Erythritol is a sugar alcohol used as a low-calorie sweetener, but it's also naturally found in fruit and vegetables, and it can be derived from fruits and vegetables.
Which is important to know. Yeah. It's not an artificial sweetener. This is what we're talking about. This is not an artificial sweetener. It's a natural zero-calorie sweetener.
We also produce erythritol in our body. So keep that in your mind. I will talk about that in a moment. But the actual study was titled Artificial Sweetener, Erythritol, and Cardiovascular Event Risk. So what was found was that researchers noticed an association between blood levels of erythritol and the likelihood that participants in this study suffered from heart attacks and strokes. Now, without any detail, without reading the study, it is very, very easy to just go ahead and say erythritol intake causes, not even increases your risk. This is what these articles are doing, causes heart attacks and strokes. So, but let's actually look at the study, how'd they come to this conclusion, and what were their conclusions. So because erythritol can be made in the body or obtained from food, it is essential to differentiate between the two. However, in this study, researchers did not examine dietary intake at all. They did not examine dietary intake at all. So how on earth could any article say that intake of erythritol causes heart attacks and strokes? It is absolutely insane to me because they didn't even test dietary intake in this study. So you cannot say patients with high levels were because they ate a lot of it or produced the erythritol themselves because they didn't study it. But actually, we can tell from this study that it was more likely from producing it on their own. Why is that? So dietary erythritol does not stay in the body long because it is poorly metabolized and excreted in the urine. So even if consumption was high, it doesn't stick around. It is excreted. So the levels that were found would not be found from dietary intake. And the body can produce erythritol in response to oxidative stress or vascular damage. This makes complete sense because the individuals in this study who did have higher plasma erythritol had more cardiovascular events. They had cardiovascular disease. They suffered from strokes and heart attacks. That is just a data point. That is a quality of these subjects. These were sick individuals, already sick individuals. So it makes sense that their erythritol levels were high because our body increases production of it in response to oxidative damage, like you would see if you've suffered from a stroke or have heart disease. So researchers followed sick people over a long period of time. Regardless of their diet, these individuals are going to have poor health markers and end up dying. That's just how it is.
So is it like an explain it to me like I'm 5 review? Tell me if this is accurate. Essentially, this study just tested for blood concentration of what people were saying it caused heart attack, caused stroke. They weren't measuring at all if it was coming from their diet, coming from processed foods, coming from just existing in their own body. They weren't testing this at all. They just noticed that levels were higher in individuals who also had higher instances of heart attack and stroke, correct? Yes. Which is also, ipso facto, those levels rise in the body on their own in sick individuals who these instances would likely be happening anyways.
Yeah.
So in review, it seems like this individual study is not really telling us anything new.
No.
Like it's really just confirming. It's like, oh yeah, erythritol levels in our blood are elevated when we're sick. Yep, confirmed. That's all it's really saying. It's not really saying anything else.
Yeah. And the researchers you have to analyze your data. Researchers don't just say they notice this association and then they're gone. You have to analyze that. You have to say what this means because yes, you can notice, you can have this finding, you can bring it to the table. But then what does it mean? That is the difference between results and conclusion. Let's go back to science class. You can provide your results, but then you have to interpret your results. What does this mean for the population that I am communicating to? The researchers clearly outlined in this study that this did not mean anything for the greater population when it comes to artificial sweetener intake and stroke or heart attack because they did not measure dietary intake.
That's the funniest part. The researchers, they're not the ones starting these claims. That's the funniest part to me. Is they're not the ones starting these little myths that go around. So that's when it comes to erythritol. And again, we're not pro erythritol. We're just trying to cut through and say, hey, these people telling you that you're going to die from a heart attack and stroke, they don't know what they're talking about. That's essentially all we're doing.
And it's so fun. You know what's so fucking funny to me? These same people who will push this CNN article and call it a study and refer to this study with so much power are the same people who don't believe in research because the FDA can't be trusted.
Slight contradictions, but it was another prime example of this where, again, and that's what we're trying to teach is like, it's important to explore these because there's people that will do this all the time. I know that's what is his name?
Oh my God. Carnivore MD.
Carnivore MD.
He right? This is guy the king of it. If he could get an award for anything, it would be that he's really good at it.
Yeah, he's phenomenal at catching your attention because he does it. This is why people are largely afraid of, I think, seed oils today too, because he won't stop talking about those, but he does it on artificial sweeteners too, where he's like, look at this, look at all this research that shows that aspartame causes cancer. If you have this Diet Coke, you're getting cancer, not mentioning you would need probably close to 3,000 Diet Cokes a day. You know, he's not saying that. So that's what we're just saying. It's important to dig a little bit deeper. And reading research is hard, right? That's why we did the research review on premium. It's hard to interpret research.
One of the reasons why I feel so strongly about this too is I have gotten many comments about how my master's degree doesn't mean anything, yada, yada. Like, oh, she's a spy for the FDA, whatever, because I got my master's in nutrition. And I just think it's hilarious because I would fail an exam. Like, it is an immediate failure if you use the word cause instead of association when interpreting research. It's an immediate F in your statistical analyses course. And that's how serious it is, because if you do that in the real world, and that's a lawsuit, and it has implications beyond just, stupid TikTok. But
yeah, well, and for people listening too, this is why I think, just to accurately represent, I think, where we're coming from, we don't like to name drop and call out a lot of people, but why we have a specific problem with Carnivore MD is he is an MD, right? He has a doctorate. He knows and is very aware of what he's doing when he's doing it, right? A lot of people, it's hard to get mad at someone who's doing it without wrong intention, right? A lot of people who can't interpret research, they're genuinely doing it because they care about others' health. They should definitely spend more time being, you know what I'm saying? It's not okay where someone like Carnivore MD, who has a doctorate, who got tested and graded on this, knows specifically what he's doing and is choosing to do it because he knows it's going to grow his companies, put money in his pockets, and grow his reach. That's why, and I just want to give that clarification because we poop on him a lot, but that's the reason why, because there's a million people that say aspartame causes cancer. We don't really care. It's the people who are intentionally lying. That's the big issue. Now, I was even going through this because I want to touch on, I think, spend a good amount of time on gut health and on weight loss, because those are the two where I think most people can interpret this stuff. We can briefly skip over the glucose and insulin, because honestly, and this is just the same story as above, there's been zero human studies showing anything, whether artificial sweeteners are taken alone or with food, that it has zero impact on insulin, on blood glucose compared to control groups, right? Zero. There's just nothing to talk about. So same thing. I know a lot of people like to put like the mechanism in place, like, oh, well, it's artificial, so it contains 0 calories, but it tricks your brain that it does. So your brain, that's not how your body works. Your body's a little bit tougher to trick than that. Okay. So I think it's fair enough that we can skip over that part and just say, especially when it comes to diabetes. And honestly, it's the only, I think, side note is it's honestly almost more just beneficial for diabetics in that case too. Not only is it not negative, but has potential benefits.
Yeah. We can put the studies, there's a few studies, we can link them below if you want to read them a little bit more. And I think just closing it with, there was a recent consensus statement by experts in nutrition, medicine, physical activity, and public health, I'll link this below, concluded that the use of low-calorie sweeteners in diabetes management may contribute to better glycemic control. So Tony didn't just pull that out of his ass. That is huge. And that is something that should not be surpassed, and the misinformation can make people who could actually really benefit from this avoid it or fearful of it. So if you want to learn more about that, we can link those.
Yeah, which we're gonna try and do a better job, because we now put them more in our notes instead of just while we're collecting research. We're actually going to do a better job of actually linking the actual studies down below. We'll see if we can hold us accountable. If we don't, DM us and be like, hey, you dipshits, do the thing you said you do. Now let's talk about, would you rather pick a piece? Because I think weight loss we can go through quicker for weight loss and weight gain, and then finish up on gut health, because I think that's where a lot of the human research lately is surrounding, is gut health and artificial sweeteners. So let's look at weight loss and weight gain, because it is a big debate today on whether or not artificial sweeteners are beneficial for weight loss, and some people claiming that they even cause weight gain. And a lot of this, I think, comes from, and we talk about this a lot, and it's a very, very important thing. If you can understand this, even if you're not big into reading research, if you can understand mechanism does not equal outcome, you can shift through pretty much anyone who's completely full of crap and who might be worth listening to. If you can understand this one thing, and we talk about it a lot, the whole mechanism versus outcome. Now, and it can be confusing, right? Now, artificially sweetened food and drinks, they typically contain fewer calories than the alternative, right? Diet Coke versus Coke, 0 calories versus what's in a Coke, like 120, whatever it is.
I have no idea.
But no calories versus calories. And we know this, right? The fundamental rules of weight loss, you got to be in a calorie deficit. So generally you'd think, okay, well, something that's less calories would be good, right? If I'm taking in fewer calories because of this artificially sweetened instead of a naturally or nutritively sweetened food, that should help me with weight loss, right? And I think this is confusing because people will have this part of the debate. It's the hunger versus cravings debate, where there's a lot of people that will say that you increase cravings, you increase hunger when you take these artificially sweetened food or beverages versus the real thing. And that's because sugar does satisfy the reward center in your brain, where artificial sweeteners don't necessarily hit the same buttons. And this is even true when you look at MRI scans of brains of groups either having artificial sweetened food or beverage versus sugary sweetened foods or beverages. And when you actually look at this, even the individuals in the MRI scan looking at images of high calorie foods will have a lot more brain activity in the artificially sweetened group. They get more of a drive for that food compared to the people who actually were satisfied by that. And that's the conversation we've had a million times, is the hunger versus cravings. They're very different. And I think what was my favorite, it was at the Aloe House where you broke it down perfect. The difference between hunger and cravings is if someone put a bowl of green beans in front of you, when you think you're having a hunger or craving, it's like if you see a bowl of green beans and you would eat it, okay, you're hungry. If you're like, no, I really don't, it's a craving. You're not hungry, it's a craving.
Hunger versus appetite.
Exactly. So that's the mechanism, is people's brains actually light up a little bit more when they have this artificially sweetened food or beverage compared to the real thing when you show them these images. So they should be consuming more of those foods. But when you look at research on real life outcomes, people who substitute sugar sweetened food and drinks with artificial sweeteners actually feel less hungry, eat fewer total calories, and generally lose weight faster, not only matched, but faster than groups who avoid them or don't have the sugar sweetened substitute. I mean, data from randomized controlled trials support this. Every human study done essentially supports this. There's either no difference or a benefit when using these artificially sweetened food or beverages. And I use them when I'm going through a cutting or fat loss phase. They are so helpful. So helpful when I would have my protein waffles in the morning, substituting, going, oh, sugar-free syrup, sugar-free coffee sweeteners, sugar-free. You're saving hundreds of calories through the day, which adds up.
And it's like, do you think that this is all people are consuming? Like, yeah, if your diet is, I think of it sometimes this is like the end of a cutting period for bodybuilders, where it's like, okay, as low calorie as possible. And we have a lot of these sugar-free things. We're not really eating many whole foods, not a nutritious diet whatsoever, but it's not advertised as one. And yeah, that is where it can be not so beneficial for your weight loss journey or your health in general. But these are oftentimes being added with foods, or if you're just trying to have a beverage and you're going to eat later and you're still eating a nutritious diet, like that just allows you to eat more food when you're trying to lose weight. That's what that does. If you were just there, and I think that, and there's a huge difference, remember, between just suppressing your appetite with all these low calorie foods, even though you're still hungry. If you're not eating, the act of not eating, it's not because you're having the sugar-free version that's making you more hungry. You don't have enough food inside of you. And I think that that's also shown by some randomized controlled trials having demonstrated the opposite effect, including decrease in hunger and reduced dessert intake compared to those who just drink water after dinner versus the artificially sweetened beverage. So it's been demonstrated before. And I think it is this mechanism versus outcome.
Well, I don't know about you, but like that's my thing at dinner. I have a caffeine-free Diet Coke. Just because for some reason it seems to check the box in my brain where I've got a little sweet tooth for chocolate, where I'll need a little bit of chocolate later at night. But if I have that Diet Coke, caffeine free, because it's late at night, that actually made a big difference for my sleep. But when I actually could have one of those at dinner, it kind of like satisfies that, where I'm like, oh, I don't need that extra thing. I don't need that extra whatever, because it helps satisfy. And that's where a lot of people like dieting, especially in the bodybuilding world. I mean, some of those guys I've seen drinking like 6 to 12 Diet Cokes, Diet Dr. Peppers per day. And that's, again, we're not saying do that, but it's because it really can help control hunger and appetite in real life. And I think that was the perfect point, is a lot of people, especially when you look at bodybuilders who have one of the least diverse diets out of any population, it's like they have 3 total meals that they take from. Not a lot of different fruits and veggies, not a lot of different meats, very cut and dry. And it's like, we're like, oh, look at all these artificial sweeteners in their diet. And then look at them around contest prep. It's like, well, maybe don't just look at what they're giving themselves, but what are they not giving themselves?
Exactly.
right? Like, what are they not
Exactly.
giving themselves? The fruits and veggies with fiber that are so massively
Hmm.
important, all the other vitamins and minerals that come with that. What are they not giving themselves? Not just what are they doing, but what are they not doing? And people always forget that.
Yeah, I also really, it's really frustrating when you see the people who are like, when I was tracking calories and, I was into the gym or my fitness phase, I was eating all of this protein powder and protein bars and sugar free this, sugar free that in my gut. And I gained so much weight, blah, blah, blah. And then I cut these out and I
Mhm,
actually lost weight. I improved my gut health. It's you were eating a nutrient poor diet. You were not
mhm,
eating sufficient calories, causing you to binge. You were in this cycle of restriction as well. A lot of people who struggle with restrictive dieting and restrictive eating disorders reach for this sugar free when they're actually hungry.
yeah,
They actually have hunger. They actually need food. So, of course, if you continuously try to push that down and push it down, yeah, you're going to have more cravings for it. It's not the artificial sweetener causing that.
mhm,
And a lot of those stories, you see them a lot. I especially see them with women, and they're not honest about how restrictive and how unhealthy as a whole their eating patterns were. It's
yeah.
not
Yeah, well, it's
the
always that
artificial sweeteners.
conversation where people are looking for what's the smoking gun, but they always forget the whole, what are those replacing? Because if you're having 12, 15, 20 artificially sweetened food or beverages per day, it's like, okay, if you're starting to notice anything negative in your mood and your sleep and your digestive system and your gut health, what we're about to talk about, it's fair to assume, okay, yeah, maybe that stuff that you're giving yourself is attributing to that. But you got to look at the whole picture. What are
Mm-hmm.
those replacing? What are those replacing that you're now not giving yourself that could also be giving there?
Yeah.
That's something that so many people, and that's why I want to dig into the gut health, because this is even, I think, one of the hotter topics today when it comes to artificial sweeteners. People are starting to move on from the cancer piece. They're starting to move on from others. But I think that there's a big resurgence because our homeboy, love him till we die, Huberman even brought this up on one of his episodes, making a claim that artificial sweeteners damage gut health. And the study was also a little shaky, right? What we're going to discern, but
Yeah.
people are really now attacking artificial sweeteners on their gut health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, it's really frustrating. I mean, this is just a trend with all gut health researchers, but and research just in general, the majority
Mm-hmm.
of it is done in animals. We're not at a point where we can have a lot of data on the human gut microbiome in terms of doing human studies because all of our guts are different and it's very complex and difficult to study. So we have a lot of animal data. That's not discounting these animal studies to inform future studies, and maybe we'll get there one day, but we're just not there with the human research.
Mm-hmm.
And a very similar pattern. Scientists have found that animals fed artificial sweeteners experience changes to their gut bacteria. Does that sound familiar? If you
A
go
little
and
bit.
Google artificial sweeteners and gut bacteria, you'll find a whole slew of articles suggesting that they can wreak havoc on your gut. Articles refer to one common study, which was carried out in a petri dish, in other words, an in vitro study. So you're doing this in the lab. Bacteria from the gut were cultivated with human cells and given artificial sweeteners, again, in a petri dish in a lab. And it threw off their gut bacteria. It killed off a lot of the good gut bacteria and led to an imbalance in the gut microbiome. Yeah, that that can happen when you are also doing this in a lab and you are artificially injecting little tiny cells with megadoses of artificial sweeteners.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When these studies were carried out on humans, which they, in the Journal of Nutrients, we will link this below. I'm going to keep saying it so remember. Scientists did not observe similar results. Even at higher doses of sucralose, they found that artificial sweeteners do not alter the human gut microbiome, even for a short period. So again, that's one study, and there's not many human studies, but this data has not been replicated in humans, and we cannot say that something happening in a petri dish
Yeah.
at large doses that aren't safe to consume, that aren't added to foods. That's not going to happen in humans. You cannot say that. And only a few mice studies discovered that when giving extraordinarily high doses of artificial sweeteners, their guts changed. But you know what's really comforting about this, Tony? Is you and I and everyone listening
We're not
aren't
mice.
rats, which is really cool. You're
Yeah, we
not
don't mess
likely
with
to
rats.
You're not likely to consume 50 cans of Diet Coke a day, every day of the year. If you are, maybe personally message one of us, because I think that there's something like maybe you need some support, because I understand an emotional support beverage once a day, but 50 cans a day, then I'd be a little concerned, and maybe you need a little bit of emotional support there.
But it's a perfect example of translational data. Because if you're it's like, again, the in vitro study, and that's, again, for anyone who's wants to step their foot in the door, you can start understanding these terms. If you ever say in vitro, it's in a petri dish in a lab, right? So if you're observing something out of its natural habitat, like the gut microbiome, not in the gut, it's important. And again, that data was important because that data probably led us to want to do human research. That's a great study, right? It's like, hey, you guys might want to test this out in humans, but the translational data is the important piece. Yeah. Does it actually carry out in humans? And if not, we're missing a piece of the puzzle. That's what it breaks down to.
Yeah, there was a really good consensus from a panel of experts, researchers in 2020 on all the research available to that date. So that was 2020 on low-calorie sweeteners and gut health. And they came to a very similar conclusion that we just mentioned at this time, and even currently this time, even though it's 2023. Data on the effects of low-calorie sweeteners on the human gut microbiota are limited. They're extremely limited, and they don't provide adequate evidence that they impact gut health at doses relevant to human consumption. If you are consuming a large amount of artificially sweetened products, sugar-free products, if you are replacing them with whole foods, if you don't have many whole foods in your diet, yes, your gut health is going to suffer. The cause is not the artificial sweetener. The cause is a lack of diversity in your diet, a lack of fiber, a lack of whole foods, and eating mainly processed foods. That is not because of a single artificial sweetener killing off your good gut bacteria.
And here's the thing I like to think about too, is think about it really in the doses, because I don't think people really understand this. These artificial sweeteners are anywhere from 200 to 20,000 times sweeter than sugar, meaning you would need 200 times less or 20,000 times less of this artificial sweetener to elicit the same sweetness. So even if you're drinking a few Diet Cokes, if you actually put that artificial sweetener in your hand, you would look at it and be like, is this little tiny pinch of whatever destroying my entire body? Is that one little tiny, is that the smoking gun that we've been looking for? Is that tiny, tiny little amount?
I think it's just also important to remember we don't eat foods in isolation.
Yeah.
So something that is really, I try to stress about animal studies, again, I will say they're powerful and we need them, but what is so great about them is you can control the environment that animals, lab rats and mice live in. You can put them in a controlled space. You cannot expose them to stress. You can give them the same exact diet. You can control for their sleep. You can control for their mood. And you can isolate a single factor like artificial sweetener intake. You cannot do that with human beings. It is unethical and will never be done. But to extrapolate that and say the same applies for humans assumes that we all live in a box. And we all are doing the same thing every day, have the same stressors, have the same health history, have the same sleep schedule, have the same exact life, the same exact calorie intake, everything. That is what you are assuming to say that this applies to humans as well in all humans. And it sounds idiotic. It definitely does. But that is what you have to assume if you're going to make that claim. But no one would say that because then you sound crazy.
Or no one would listen. That's probably why no one says it. No one listens.
No one would listen. Yeah. So...
Well, and I think that's the overall, because it's not saying that there's nothing here with artificial sweeteners. Again, that like our whole point of this is not to shove artificial sweeteners down your throat. The point of this whole thing is to hopefully alleviate any concern you might have over these specifics. And I would say instead of, because we can't really give hard recommendations on this, but I think the recommendation piece goes back to what we were talking about. Is technically, yes. Could you have up to 7,000 packets of Sweet and Low a day? Could you have up to 35 Diet Cokes a day? You could potentially, but we would not recommend that because, again, it's not just that we're not recommending it because of the dose of artificial sweetener. It's what are you taking away from what your diet could be when you do that? Like the same approach that both of us have when it comes to nutrition in pretty much every single case. Instead of approaching if you want to lose weight, if you want to build muscle, don't look at what you should take away first. Look at what you can add in. And for a lot of people, artificial sweeteners would actually be beneficial, especially when it comes to weight loss in a lot of circumstances. If you're avoiding these like the plague, but you could save 500 calories a day by adding in several artificially sweetened food or beverages. And even if you just have a real hard stop with the artificial, even though we know that natural doesn't mean good, artificial doesn't mean bad, you still have monk fruit extract, stevia, right? All these things, even erythritol, which is a natural sweetener. The CNN doesn't want you to think so. You have these natural sweeteners too, where even if it brings you comfort, neither of them in small to moderate doses are going to give you any issues. At least all of the data up to this point is showing us that we don't need to be concerned about this. Like none of it.
Yeah. I feel like I like to provide examples every now and then. And so with one of my clients who's on a weight loss journey, every single night for as long as they could remember, would have a cosmic brownie. Not just one, but multiple cosmic brownies.
I love cosmic
brownies. The idea of not having something sweet after dinner invoked a lot of stress. So having something sweet was still the goal. We didn't want to get rid of that, but slowly started replacing that with this one. Quest came out with these like soft baked cookies, and
are they good?
Got a hold of them. I haven't tried them. He says they're awesome, really likes them, and has 2 of them, satisfies his sweet tooth, and is having roughly like 600 calories less now a day because of that one isolated switch. And every now and then we'll have one cosmic brownie. It's not that we're saying you can't have a cosmic brownie.
But it's the difference between 15 a week down to maybe 1 a week.
But also key thing that we also did, there's multiple factors, right? Is also making sure we're having a high protein, high fiber dinner, because the sweet craving's still there, still wants it, but it's the ravenous hunger isn't also present. And that's one example, but that is a health behavior change that is really beneficial in the long term. Again, it's one story, but if you're saying all artificial sweeteners are bad and causing disease and causing cancer, then you are going to say that that's not okay, that behavior change is not a good one for your health.
Yeah.
When it absolutely is.
That's all we're saying. Be a critical thinker. That's what we're just be a critical thinker. You're smart. Our audience is smart. That's one of our favorite pieces about our listeners. They ask phenomenal questions. They're smart. You're smart people. So be a critical thinker when it comes to stuff like this. And especially the whole, again, lump them together. These are all very different sweeteners with very different properties. But for the most part, these are not something to be avoiding like the plague. That's all we're really trying to do. And that's why we wanted to put together this full episode today, is because we're like, okay, there's enough here that we could build it up. Enough topics, enough surrounding it. So that's where we're going to leave this one off. There are some research reviews where we dug into specific studies over on the premium side. If you want to dig back there, actually even going over the erythritol stuff, there were like 3 or 4 different research reviews we mentioned even in today's, which is cool. But as always, if you want to go over there, you can also ask your AMA questions for our monthly AMA episodes. There's a lot of changes coming over there soon too, so be on the lookout. And then everything else important, hold us accountable. If you're listening to this and you look into the show notes and you don't see studies, DM us your middle finger or something.
We won't
like
forget them.
That's what I'm saying. We won't, but if we do, just DM us like your middle finger and say, hey,
only Tony.
Stop being lazy. Yeah, just me.
I get those enough on TikTok.
Well, we hope you all have a beautiful day, beautiful week. Talk to you soon.